Hi, this is Sogan Bharti, and welcome to another episode of TFR Newsroom. And today we have with us once again Kris Nova, open source advocate at Sysdig. Kris, it's good to see you again, though not in person like last time, but it's still good to have you on the show.
Thanks. It's really great to be here, and it's good to see you again. I wish I could see you in person right now.
Right, right. Now, well, this is a KubeCon week. You have worked on Kubernetes from very early days. So tell me a bit about the experience itself, and then we can also talk about the new release that is coming out, which is I think 1.19. So let's talk about your Kubernetes experience.
Wow, my Kubernetes experience. Well, I guess to start, the first time I ever heard Kubernetes, I think was in 2015, and by 2016, I was contributing for my day job. I was working as an infrastructure engineer, and I mean, I don't even know where to go from there. I was working on COPS, and then I started working on kubeadmin and kubecorn, and I got into the infrastructure side of things, and then I started working on other parts of Kubernetes, and fast forward a few years, and now I'm working full time on security, and I'm still here.
You have seen the evolution of Kubernetes, not only the project itself, but the community also. How much has the project changed, especially in the context of security itself? Because in early days, security used to be an afterthought. It's not anymore.
We This is actually one of the big talking points of the keynote that I gave yesterday at KubeCon, which was kind of the evolution of Kubernetes and where it was versus where it is today. And I mean, you had mentioned community, but I think when I first joined Kubernetes, to kind of like paint the picture of what it was like for me, I was one of five diversity and inclusion scholar winners at my first KubeCon. And I remember during the my first KubeCon, we stopped parts of the conference so that the engineers who were at the conference could sit down on the floor and actually make a quick update to the Kubernetes code base because somebody had detected a vulnerability in Kubernetes. So that was a very grassroots experience for me, and I loved every moment of it because I felt like I was a part of the action. And now, several years later, I can't even, it would take a full-time job just for me to keep up with what's going on in Kubernetes security these days. So it started out very small and very intimate, and now it is. I mean, it's a monolithic project. It's huge, and it changes, by the minute almost. So it's exciting to watch it grow like that.
So true. You mentioned a keynote. I just want to hear a bit more about. I missed it. Tell us a bit more about what was. You did talk about what was it about, but just share some highlights of your keynote.
Sure. So the talk was given by myself and what started out as a colleague and is now a really good friend of mine, Shane Lawrence. He's based out of Canada. He works for Shopify, and we talked about how Shopify is using Falco to secure their PCI compliant environment in production. And one of the lessons that we talked about was this sort of like exchange between prevention and detection in cloud native. One of the things we said in the keynote was the only thing that's been constant in cloud native over the past few years is the fact that things change. And when you look at security in Kubernetes or any element of Kubernetes, infrastructure or, RBAC or ABAC or any parts of the core Kubernetes components, they've evolved and they've changed over time. And we've had to figure out how to deal with that and how to deprecate ideas and how to bring new ideas into it. And as part of the keynote, we looked at where Kubernetes was and what it offered, or more importantly, what it didn't offer at the time, and what it offers today. And we looked at how Falco sort of creates this second side of the same coin that gives you this ability to detect things so that you can begin to prevent them moving forward. The concrete example we used was when Shane got involved in Kubernetes, RBAC wasn't even a thing yet. We were just starting to talk about it. And so using any sort of preventative technique to prevent certain clients or users from doing something in your cluster wasn't something that you could easily do. So having a tool that could detect malicious and unwanted behavior so that you could at least know about it would be very useful. And that's where Falco kind of entered the picture. So that was the lesson of the keynote was everything's going to change and you're never going to be prepared for everything. And I think as we saw in 2020, obviously there's things that happen in the world that you can't be prepared for. And so you just got to kind of respond to it the best that you can.
Right, change is the only constant. You talked about Falco. Tell me what's new going on at Falco.
What's new in Falco? Wow, so we have a lot. We're cutting a release next week. We're cutting 0.25 next week. Right now, the Falco project releases every month, and I'd say our biggest features. I mean, let's go a little bit further back. I was going to say this month, but let's go all the way back to last KubeCon. I think our biggest new features are we have a gRPC output mechanism that's defined as an API. One of our maintainers, Leonardo Di Donato, he's based out of Italy, gave a presentation on it this morning about how a user could potentially use this gRPC output mechanism and associated SDKs for it to connect Falco up to various parts of their cloud native applications or cloud native infrastructure. Probably the simplest example here is something unexpected happened in my cluster. Let's say somebody execed into a pod. And I want to know about it, but I want to know about it in the way that my pipeline expects to alert me. And the gRPC output mechanism gives me an easy way to be able to connect that or wire that up to the rest of my application.
We are talking, I mean, the reason we are not in the same room right now is because it's pandemic. Because of this pandemic, a lot of, the way people were consuming cloud has also changed. A lot of workloads which were not supposed to be running on cloud, they are moving to cloud. Which also kind of increases the risk for security. So from your perspective, what you have seen is that what does it mean for security, and what does it mean for project like Falco? Because a lot of use cases that your customers are running there, once again, they were not prepared for it. So what are the security implications, and how Falco itself has kind of changed to handle those?
So if I could say one sentence about Falco, it is Falco is the tool that you put in place for the times when something happens that you're not prepared for. So it is the tool that works at the most fundamental level of the stack, and it consumes every system call that's happening at runtime. And we detect when unexpected things happen. And how we define what something unexpected is we have a very rigorous set of security rules and security policy that creates a very tight constraint around your Kubernetes ecosystem. And if something tries to escape that very tight set of controls, that very tight boundary, Falco triggers an alert. And that really is your first glimpse into telling the story of what happened and what went wrong. And the beauty of Falco is it doesn't have to just be for security. So, probably the most common example here is we got hacked. Right? Something malicious happened, some sort of malicious software entered our system, some unexpected thing happened and somebody detected an attack vector, and they gained access to our system and we didn't want them to. And that's the very common story that you hear with Falco. And because we're detecting what's happening at the syscall layer, we're able to tell that story very quickly and send an alert very quickly. But even more so, anytime something unexpected happens, we can trigger an alert. So this could be something like perhaps there was a code deployment, your team's code, and something went wrong. And all of a sudden, your code started opening up attack vectors to various parts of your stack. Falco would trigger an alert in that case. So you're starting to see this idea of it's not necessarily about security or preventing malicious behavior as much as it's about detecting anomalies, about detecting when something unexpected happens. And in my mind, that's the first step into securing a system on top of already taking preventative action. I think the very common analogy that you hear here is if you look at how you would secure, let's say, a house or a car or a bank, there's usually two systems in place. There's the locks on the front door, and then there's the cameras in the corner of the room. Falco's the camera. Falco is the thing that is always watching. It's the surveillance system, and it's there to help you and to alert you when somebody is able to get past the initial point of defense, which is your locks, that's RBAC, that's SE Linux, that's SecComp, that's all of these wonderful preventative things that we've been researching in the computer science for the last decade.
Awesome. Thanks for explaining it in such, such a manner. Now, since we started talking about Kubernetes, so I do want to talk about the new release of Kubernetes that's coming out. I think it's version 1.19. What's new? What's new there?
So this is, I had a feeling you were going to ask this question, and I've been putting a lot of thought into this, and I've got it boiled down to two main features that I want to talk about. So the first one is hierarchical namespaces. I would like to talk about this because I think, I'm not going to say everyone, but a lot of folks are talking about this at KubeCon this week. It's getting a lot of interest and it's getting a lot of hype. So I think it's important to explore that one. And the other one I wanted to talk about was this concept of what they're calling structured logging. And I wanted to bring a little bit of clarity to that and talk about why we think that's important. So hierarchical namespaces are basically, if you look at, in computer science, if you look at how a tree works or a graph or a digraph, they all sort of share this concept called inheritance. And hierarchical namespaces are a way for you to use namespaces to inherit policy from other namespaces. Now, I believe right now it only goes one node deep, meaning that you can only have one child and one parent, but that does give you and your team substantially more flexibility for how you start to express namespaces. So the really simple example here is I would like to create a namespace for the engineering department. And then in the engineering department, maybe we have 5 sub namespaces, one for my engineering team, one for your engineering team, one for our cron jobs, and one for this DevOps team or something. And we're allowed to express policy at the higher level, and then that trickles down into the lower namespaces below. So it's an exciting new feature, and it's implemented using a hierarchical namespace controller, which if you've watched any of my talks or any of the other talks on CRDs and controllers and operators, the hierarchical namespace controller, or HNC, is basically a CRD operator model that detects what's going on in your cluster using labels and then goes and reinforces that using a declarative pattern moving forward. So I think that's an exciting new feature. It creates a lot of flexibility. Namespaces in Kubernetes have always kind of been a bit, they're exciting, but they're a little bit weird because you need to use cluster role to create and mutate a namespace. And this kind of just creates this whole new world of namespaces that we didn't have before that we have now. So that was the first one that I was excited about. The other one, and this one strikes me very, very personally, is structured logging. And what we mean when we say structured logging is really what it should be called, is structured logging for the control plane. And if you have ever debugged Kubernetes before, which this is where, I have Cloud Native Infrastructure sitting over here on my shelf, the book that I wrote. Debugging Kubernetes is not easy. Just fundamentally, it's hard, it's confusing, and if you don't know Go, and if you're not willing to go and look into the source code, it's going to be pretty overwhelming. So what structured logging does is it creates a structure for the Kubernetes control plane log so that you can hook it up to tools like Splunk or any logging parser or logging aggregator, and you're able to go through and start to actually make sense of what's going on in Kubernetes. So we now have a rigorous structure for how Kubernetes begins to log so that we can make sense of it using higher level logging tools, which we haven't had until now. So if you were debugging Kubernetes, I hate to say it, but SSH and tail minus F was pretty much your go. That's how you did it. That's how you debugged Kubernetes up until now. So this is very exciting that we've gotten here. So I think this is another exciting feature for 1.19.
Right. So you picked 2 of your favorite features. Was there any feature that you were expecting which did not make into this release? I think the previous releases, Sidecar was one of the features which, there was a discussion going on. So was there any feature that you were expecting to make into this release, but it's going to miss it, and it was something you're looking forward to?
So, and this is more of a philosophical question. There's a lot of work going on in Kubernetes, and my brother is constantly trying to beat the clock with features that he's working on professionally, trying to get them into Kubernetes. And I guess my answer here is nothing unexpected happens. If you've ever hung out with the release team, in fact, real quick, big shout out to the release team. Those are the folks that are actually making all of this happen. These are the folks who are putting on code freeze, making sure the docs get updated, actually staying up late at night on Zoom calls, making sure Kubernetes gets out so that all of us can use it and have these types of conversations. But really, Kubernetes is a very great example of a time-delimited release cycle, meaning if you don't make the deadline by the deadline, it doesn't make it in. And then you wait 3 months and it'll make it into the next one. So I learned a very long time ago not to get excited about features making it into a certain release. They make it in when they make it in. And honestly, if they don't make it into this one, you would be surprised how quick 3 months can go in open source. I feel like every time I have one of these interviews, there's another Kubernetes release with more features that I just was waiting to come out. So no, I wasn't surprised. I think probably more than I was expecting made it into this release, to be honest.
Right. When you look at these features, what kind of where do you see is Kubernetes as a project kind of heading towards? What does it look like as you have been with the project for early days, early on? So talk about that.
Yeah, so Kubernetes is let's use the hierarchical namespaces as a really good example here, and we'll kind of use that as our poster child as we talk about this. Kubernetes has, I don't want to say leveled off, but has started to calm down. So it went from when I first joined, it was very much like do it yourself, get in there, whoever writes the code makes the rules, and like this is open source. And it was like kind of the wild west of open source. It was like just get in there and get it done. And then we started to bring structure to it. The steering committee formed. We took the incubation cycle and we moved that out of core, and we started to solidify what core was. And if you look at it like on the stellar scale, like it started to kind of come down and started to settle down as a star, and it's no longer this big explosive project that it used to be. And now I think we're starting to see things like agency and hierarchical namespaces, which if you go and you look at the multi-tenancy organization or repository in the Kubernetes organization, you can even see that the agency controller is in what they call incubator. And we've done the same thing in Falco, and all of a sudden we're seeing the Kubernetes concept of project evolution has kind of leveled off. And now those projects are having their own concept of project evolution. And the CNCF has their own concept of project evolution. And Falco does, and HNC does, and Kubeadmin, and all of these other sub-projects are now kind of repeating the same thing that Kubernetes did, circa 2016, 2017. So depending on what Kubernetes means to you, I think the actual true core project of Kubernetes is relatively calm and relatively static, whereas I think all of the sub-projects is where all the exciting stuff is happening now, which is what we were just talking about.
Anything else you'd like to touch upon?
So Swap. So we're starting a new web series at Sysdig where we're going to be going into all things cloud native security and secure DevOps, where we're going to be start talking about different security implementations across cloud native. So everything from Falco to Kubernetes to Prometheus to the entire cloud native ecosystem, and what does secure DevOps and secure DevOps mean in that instance. So we're going to be announcing that from the Sysdig official channels coming up over the next 30 to 60 days. And we just wanted to invite you and everybody else to come and join the party and get involved if they're interested in joining.
Awesome. Kris, thank you so much for taking time out today and talking about not only Kubernetes, but also Falco. And as usual, I love to talk to you, and I will look forward to talk to you again. Thank you.
Thank you.